Considering like a lot of our preschool programs, as you mentioned, are privately set up. So there's, often some sort of tuition or childcare fees, things like that are associated, which ultimately is going to impact negatively a lot of our lower income families, lower to no income families. And so I'm just curious, what is your take? What are your thoughts, information that you might have in regards to utilizing data to support families that are in those situations?
Yeah, well, it really, I mean, the early childhood education system, I'll say in quotes because it's not, it's a non-system and it's very much broken. It is essentially the childcare system. And again, it's a non-system really. It depends on how much money the family makes. So for families who are, very low income, there is the childcare subsidy system. So you can qualify for childcare assistance, and preschool is an age group within childcare. So it goes up until kindergarten for full day care. And then usually beyond as well for after school care and things like that. So if you it's all income qualification based. If you make little enough money and you work and meet many other criteria, then, or you're getting education or something, then you can qualify for that assistance. Now, not all childcare providers accept subsidy and participate in that system. So when you talk about the best preschools, a lot of times they might not accept that public funding. So that's an equity discrepancy.
I was just about to say, it sounds like we got an equity issue.
Absolutely. Some providers will say that they do, but they don't really. There's generally no requirement to accept a family, so they can, because they're private businesses and they can kind of run them how they want and accept the children that they want. So it is absolutely an equity issue.
And they'll just do a quota too. We have 10 vouchers only, or only 5. You know what I'm saying? Like they'll do it to like so they can say, oh yeah, we have folks that are on scholarships. But it'd be like 2 students that'd be on scholarships, you know what I'm saying? So those are some things that they're doing to kind of get away with or get over that.
There's the very real aspect that our childcare subsidy system often does not subsidize enough. So those businesses that accept subsidy are sometimes doing so as almost an act of charity because they make less from the government than they do from full paying families. But almost nowhere does the subsidy compensate the full amount of the cost of care. Like some will stated 80% of market rate, and market rate is already not enough to cover the true cost of care. So you're asking businesses, right? Business owners who need to keep the lights on, pay their staff to just for no reason other than that these families qualify, take a 20% cut on what they should be paid for their service. It's unheard of, right? It's like this, that doesn't happen in any other business. So there's a lot broken about the subsidy system. On top of it all too, there's a shifting now happening due to recent policy change, but that compensation is also based on attendance rather than what childcare providers usually do, which is just charge the full amount every month. Like when my son was sick for most of the month of December, we paid the same amount for childcare as if he was there or not, right? That's how it works in childcare because they have to staff regardless. But often the subsidy doesn't compensate the same. So there's a lot of ways that you can't even fault the childcare providers, right? The system is not supporting what the need is.
So what would be your suggestion then, Jamie? If the system is not supporting?
Well, actually, they have moved. So the funding comes from CCDF at the federal government. They have moved to enrollment-based compensation, which will end up costing probably most states quite a bit more, but is the more, I would argue, equitable way to compensate for that. And it certainly is a better support for the child care providers and their staff.
What is enrollment based? What does that mean? What do you mean?
So instead of attendance based, whether the child showed up that day, it's whether they're enrolled with the program.
Oh, okay. So then even if they don't, so then let's just say they miss 10 days of school, and I could see pushback coming from that direction. So help me understand how that could be more of an equitable solution.
Because if we don't compensate the way providers need to be compensated, they just won't participate. And then you just don't have enough places for families to go who qualify, right? Okay. So like we were talking about with like the best childcare providers or the best preschool providers, if you don't compensate adequately for their service, they're just not going to participate in the system. And that's an equity issue because then the families who qualify and can't pay outright won't have access to it at all.
Okay, I see what you're saying. I can just think, and I see what you're saying. Again, I'm learning, so I'm literally learning right now. So that's why I'm asking some of these kind of questions, because I'm thinking, okay, well, if we go enrollment versus attendance, then we could end up getting ghost families,
Yeah,
meaning
it's a
they
concern. Yeah.
okay.
No, that is the concern, right?
Right.
But there are ways to look at that. I mean, confirm enrollment and have a certain threshold of attendance each month so that they're not just ghost families. All of our clients who do enrollment-based subsidy do have some kind of measure like that. But again, it's a question of staffing. You've got a school, right? You have a certain number of classrooms. You have to be able to pay that teacher. You have to be able to fund that classroom. The reality is we just have childcare providers going out of business. They're just leaving the field. Like we have a supply issue because we are not properly compensating for that cost of care in a way that's stable for them. And so they just leave. Like we have a workforce like flooding from the workforce. We will not have high quality care if we don't pay people who are educated, people who are able to sustain a living in a true field, right, that is valued and have stability in their income.
It's not just making sure that families have access, but it's also making sure that we have quality staff and we're compensating them for their services, which I think is just a general education.
They're inextricably linked. You can't separate the two, right? Access for families is providing like support for the providers. You just don't have one without the other.
Okay. Yeah. It just sounds like there's a lot of you said the system is broken, but there's a lot that would need to take place in order for things to change. I can't even imagine what things were like during COVID times, like when folks were at home and all that stuff. So my thought was like when COVID happened, I felt like this is a perfect opportunity for education to kind of revamp itself and kind of go with the times. And so unfortunately, well, at least initially I saw some changes, and then it just kind of seems like we kind of just have gone back to the way things have always been.
I will say, I think in early care and education, which is super different landscape than K-12, there was a lot of progress because for the first time ever, there was actually a flood of funding for early care and education because it was critical for workforce, right? I mean, even in the first days of the pandemic, what did we need? We needed childcare because the schools were closed. So for the frontline workers, it was like, where are the childcare providers? They were allowed to be open only for essential workers. And so there was this spotlight on how critical childcare is that almost never actually receive that kind of respect or attention on that industry. So funding came along with it. Enough? I mean, arguably no, but it was more than they've ever seen before, right?
Okay.
And frankly, like so much, it was difficult to manage that effectively in such a short time because the systems weren't in place, and we're still seeing a lot of systems be put in place for that long-term funding. But I think a lot of smart decisions were made, particularly around systems and data, actually in that time, because they weren't there and they needed them in order to be able to know how to serve their communities.
Got you. Okay. Fair enough. All right. Well, I'll tell you this, Jamie. I've learned a lot. Thank you again. Thank you for your patience with my questions.
I enjoyed it. I love talking about this stuff.
So I appreciate that. But I'd love for you to share any final words of advice you want to provide to our listeners.
Yeah, I guess 2 words of advice. One is never underestimate the life of a human and in our society and the importance of that investment. If you already believe in the importance of early care and education, then I would say also don't underestimate the importance of the system itself and the way that these policies get implemented. Day in and day out, that's what I work on. And I see, kind of how the sausage is made and how important that final step is in making the system that, either emphasizes equity and supports a great experience for families and providers that truly values them, or misses the mark.